This video is rated B for you'd better back on out of here if you don't want spoilers, buddy. I wanted to fight Zenos. Through all of the heinous acts that he's committed over the years of his life, for all the lives he's taken, and cultures he's turned upside down, he was right about some things. He was right about the races of man. He was right about some aspects of the universe, and even the world. Make no mistake, he was a madman, and needed to be stopped. But the one thing that made me smile was that he was ultimately right about me. I do find excitement in a challenge. My curiosity is piqued by mystery, and I'm always interested to see how I measure up to the rest of the world. It's one of the many reasons I play video games in the first place. The thrill of overcoming an impossible foe in a game like Elden Ring, the excitement of knowing that I defeated someone who was using nothing but meta choices with my own personalized loadout fills me with a sense of satisfaction whenever I play games like an FPS. And even in reality itself, I smile at the accomplishments I make, even in the face of those who would tell me that it's nothing to be proud of. My actions and accomplishments are mine. I know this, and Zenos does as well. But who is Zenos, and why do I find his character so fascinating? First, let's go all the way back and talk about his basic bio as a character within Final Fantasy XIV. Zenos was the son of Varus, the previous emperor of Garlemald, and as such was one of the descendants of Emet-Selch. As a sort of Garlean prince, he could have had everything he wanted in the world. Most people would be over the moon for such a thing. But Zenos was unimpressed by all of these things. Things like wealth, gender, or even the patriotism that Garlemald was so proud of were all man-made concepts to him, and thus had no true value. He saw and understood that all things would be born into this world, live through it, and die all the same. As such, he looked upon all lives equally, and only through strength did he define the worthy. Now, that does not mean that Zenos believed in a might makes right sort of philosophy, not at all. The philosophy of might makes right is the idea that the strong should always lead those who are weak, and unless you're powerful, you have no leadership skills, yada yada yada. It ultimately devolves into a philosophical nightmare. But he didn't believe in leadership. He didn't want people's approval or attention. He lived only for himself, which is what made my first interactions with him in Stormblood that much more interesting. Here was a person that could have almost anything a mortal would desire, and he didn't even care. He was in control of the entirety of Doma, but was unimpressed. When I saw Zenos for the first time, I saw someone who was more or less bored with life. He saw no value in the things that most mortal men and women placed value in, and as such, he was unimpressed by everything around him. And the one thing he did place value into was proving hard to satisfy, because few individuals in the world were able to match his expectations. Even the Warrior of Light, as overpowered as they are, struggled against Zenos on the first time they encountered one another. And yet, he saw the Warrior of Light as someone who had the potential to eventually become someone that could entertain him, or give him that stimulation that he was looking for out of his existence. Which ultimately brought us to our grand encounter with him at the Alamigo Castle. Which, to me, personally, kind of begged the question as to why he wanted the resonance in the first place. If he was already so powerful and everything in the world was so unassuming to him, then why did he feel like he needed a photocopy of the Echo? I guess he just wanted to be that much more OP than everyone else around him? I don't know. Eventually, I just boiled it down to the fact that he saw the Echo as power itself and respected that. and as such, he wanted it, because it was one of the few things in the world that fit his modus operandi. Which brought us to his first, and in my opinion, most impressive death. When Zenos took his own life in Stormblood, my jaw dropped. Because while many people saw this as an act of a coward or a fool or madman, I saw something completely different. I saw someone, for in the first time in their life, was experiencing true happiness, absolute bliss. And he understood that after this fight, everything else in the world would be hopelessly disappointing. Nothing would compare to the fight that he had with the Warrior of Light. So rather than come down from this high and be disappointed for the rest of his life, he would end it. He would end his life on the high note. He would take his own mortality in his hands and say it's over. Because he would rather die in absolute bliss than have to live another day in squalor. Of course, he was crazy and needed to be put down, otherwise he would have cut a bloody path throughout the entire world. But all the while I sat there thinking to myself, what a fascinating individual. The fight we had with him and his suicide afterwards felt real. This wasn't some character who was deluding himself. This wasn't someone who was tricked or lying or trying to push an agenda. Everything he said and did came from the most honest of places. And that made the engagement and subsequent scenes afterwards that much more real. At least to me. Which was why I was ultimately surprised when they decided to bring him back. Despite using a bootleg version of the Echo, honestly, we've seen the Resonance do more than the Echo ever has. Though I could make an entire video dedicated to how underutilized and unimpressive the Echo has been from ARR to now. Final Fantasy XIV, The Failed Potential of the Echo, coming soon to your local YouTube channel. But I digress. So, when Zenos came back, I was hesitant at first, because to me, Zenos had what was arguably the best death in all of Final Fantasy XIV. For all the reasons I mentioned but a moment ago. He would rather die in bliss than live in annoyance. And I think that it makes for an incredibly interesting character. So, as we all know, Shadowbringers goes around, Zenos is trying to make his way back to Garlemald, eventually gets to Garlemald, kills his dad, gets his body back from Elidibus, who runs away scared, and eventually he teams up with Asahi, Fandaniel, Hermes, everyone's favorite punchable face. And this eventually leads us to the encounters with an endwalker. These scenes, to me, were perfect. And while I was hesitant about Zenos' resurrection from the end of Stormblood all the way up to now, I was able to enjoy these new interactions with Zenos. Because in reality, he only wanted to recreate that bliss that he felt in Stormblood. He knew that causing mayhem up in Garlemald would eventually draw the Warrior of Light's attention and bring them to him. He knew that becoming more powerful would incentivize the Warrior of Light to become more powerful, making for an even more enriching encounter. He did everything in his power to make the Warrior of Light hate him. Hurting innocent people, attacking the Warrior of Light's friends, turning the world upside down. He wasn't doing them out of some sort of evil directive like Fandaniel was. No, not at all. He was only doing it for the selfish reason of getting the Warrior of Light's attention and keeping it on him. And I'll tell you what, Zenos did have my attention. For all of his selfish desires and mad speeches, Zenos is right about one particular thing. I adore a challenge, and as such, I was happy to give it to him. I would have the pleasure of putting down a powerful opponent, and the world would have one less homicidal maniac running around. And you don't find the truth about what Zenos is talking about just from what he says either. He confesses that the universe is ultimately a cold, lonely, and indifferent space to live within, and he's not entirely wrong. And another quest that addresses this philosophical nightmare is the Dark Knight quest. Dark Knights exist purely because the only justice that there is to be had in the universe is the one you make for yourself. If you're simply waiting for a reality to punish the wicked or guilty of something, then you would be waiting forever. A Dark Knight doesn't wait. They see evil within the tapestry of the universe and hunt it down. As such, I loved the fights we had with Zenos, and as a character, I could discuss him on a philosophical level for hours. He's just that entertaining to watch in the story. However, I have to say, I hope he stays dead this time. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, he possessed his Reaper avatar and now he's back on the Source again. But I really, really hope that's not the case. Because I feel like he was ultimately robbed of a great death in Stormblood, only to bring him back and steadily make me understand how his interactions may be even more interesting later down the road. And then there was that climactic finale with him at the very end of Endwalker. So, that's 2 great deaths he's had. Please leave him dead. Because the more you bring back that kind of character that's solely driven by one thing and one thing alone, you've seen it all at this point. And personally, I would be bored if I had to fight him a 3rd time, because now I understand Zenos, I understand his reasons, his logic, and ultimately, I agree with some of it. Even though I understand that, yes, he was mad and needed to be put down 1,000 times over. But all of that aside, I'm curious to see what his avatar does ultimately in the future, and while I think bringing him back again would do nothing but dilute what I see as a brilliant character, that will not take away that I think our first interactions with him in Stormblood were perfect, and the final encounters we had with him in Endwalker were epic. But that's just my personal take on things. Let me know what you thought about Zenos down in the comments, and I look forward to seeing all of you in future videos. Stay safe, my friends.